Before we get going, a gentle heads up to our listeners. The journey we're about to take you on with this podcast is not an easy one. We're going to explore complex questions about life and death. At what point does a life cease to be worth living? And what role should the state have in all of this? It's a challenging story, but one that deserves to be told. You're going to meet people whose stories may trigger some of you. So please take care while listening.
I was getting dressed for work, and he was standing beside me with his walker. Honey, we have to talk. Okay, honey, what do we need to talk about? I need you to help me end my life. Honey, I love you. You know I love you. I don't want to be here anymore. It hurts. It hurts too much. Everything's falling apart. I don't want to be here anymore. Can you help me end it? And I stood there, and because I knew it was coming, I could feel it. I've been watching the decline for the last 2 years up to that. And I said to him, honey, I can't do that. I'm your soulmate. How would I live with myself after? How would I go on? But I agree that things are not looking good. The seizures aren't stopping. You're getting worse. I think your liver's going to shut down again soon. I think we need to talk to Dr. Prasad. There is a program available that will help with this, and I think you would be able to get into it. So please call Dr. Prasad.
What if someone you loved asked you for help to end their life? What would you say? It's the kind of question none of us is prepared for. I'm Rob Cribb. I'm an investigative journalist, and I've spent a lot of time with Michael and Anne, the woman you just heard talking about the powerful request her husband made. They opened up their lives to me, shared intimate details about their challenges and what's inside their hearts, to help me understand death and how everything about it is changing in Canada. All of us think about death, but we don't really talk about it. These unspoken stories are exactly the kind I'm drawn to. And this question that Michael asked Anne set me on an exploration for the past year, trying to get to the bottom of all of this.
Imagine devoting your career to saving lives and keeping patients healthy until one day you discover that patients are actually asking you to help end, not save, their lives.
Everyone had been kind of, wanting this for years and years. I didn't think it would happen in my lifetime. So when I saw that...
Those who aren't near their natural death now have the right to seek medical assistance in dying.
But no country has ever launched physician-assisted suicide on the scale now underway in Canada. Earlier this year, the Supreme Court...
In 2021, almost 10,000 Canadians requested and received medical assistance in dying, or MAID. That was the year that legislation expanded to mean that people did not have to be terminally ill.
Today in Canada, people like Michael have choices. In 2016, Canada passed groundbreaking new legislation that allows people with incurable disease to seek a medically assisted death. Then, just 3 years later, Canada expanded that law to include those who are not dying, but still want to pursue this option. Now, the federal government wants to go even further for people suffering solely from mental illness. Where is the line? How far should the state go in sanctioning and facilitating a wish to die? And at what point does it go too far? I'm Rob Cribb, and this is The Ultimate Choice. How often were the two of you here in this building?
This is our second home. We spent more time here sometimes than we did at home. I used to joke with Michael when first time I came to this church, I thought I would burst into flames because I hadn't been in church in so long, it was ridiculous. I'd skipped Easters and Christmas. I used to be a C&E, Christmas and Easter person. It's the only time you'd see me in church. But I came to teach here because of a story out of Chicken Soup for the Soul about a person they finally got convinced to become a Sunday school teacher because nobody else would take the job.
Anne first started teaching Sunday school at Forest Hill United Church in Toronto back in 2003. One Sunday, she's sitting in the front row with the kids, and she notices a guy standing at the back, kind of fidgety.
Actually, I was scared of him when I first met him.
What are you talking about?
Oh, yeah, it's part of my weird wiring. I have learned never to trust anybody who's quiet because the shoe is going to fall, something's going to explode, or I'm going to step on a landmine.
She's talking about Michael. Michael's a volunteer at the church, just like her. His job was to look after the sanctuary, and he was also involved in the youth program. And she was noticing him.
So at first, I was afraid to talk to him because he was always kind of direct and a little bit gruff. So I'd kind of stay over there, or I'd be on the other side, hiding on the side of the room going, okay, I don't know. But after a while, I mean, this is a year or so, I started missing him. If he wasn't here, if he was sick for some reason, he didn't come. And I couldn't quite figure out why that would make me sad.
So this was a year of looking at each other from afar?
Or probably even longer, because again, I wasn't too quick on the draw on this sort of thing. Because I'd never really been in love with anybody before, so I didn't know what that meant. And he's kind of, he wasn't too sure himself. But eventually we started hanging out together, and then Michael's like, I'm going to do the youth group. Do you want to help me? As long as I don't have to lead it, sure. I've got enough with Sunday school kids on my plate. And the more time we spent together, the more I realized I liked him. But I had no idea how I was going to tell him. And of course, he's on the other side of the fence, and he's trying to figure out, okay, I have to tell her now. How am I going to tell her? Hey, Anne, want to help me paint an office? In the back of my head, I'm thinking, why do I want to paint an office? But sure, you need help. I'll help you paint the office. Okay. And we did.
He didn't have great game, not great dating game.
Neither did I, so we were perfect for each other. Oh, this was Michael's home. This was the only place he had control of anything. He would come here even in the middle of the night, whether it was to try and keep the boiler together because it stopped working, so the school would be warm in the morning, or if he was just in to do the cleaning for the group so that school would have a clean spot in the morning to start, whether he was fixing something that had broken or trying to change something to make it a little better and running more efficiently, like the exit signs, for example. He changed the bulbs. He went through the whole building and made it more energy efficient. So he had more than love for this building. This place gave him solace. It let him have control in a world that had none.
I started visiting with Michael and Anne at their small apartment not far from the church, back in the spring of 2022. From the beginning, the thing that jumped out to me was their sense of humor and their affection for each other.
We had been eyeing each other for a longer time than that.
Apparently, not
It's taken quite a while, buddy.
Yeah. Well, I mean, it was just...
He had to get a little incentive to get up the nose.
What took us so long, man?
I'm a coward. And,
Aren't we all, brother?
well, like all the Sunday school kids knew. And I had been working together with the Sunday school kids because I was helping her and running the youth group. And finally, when we said we're going to date, most of the kids said, well, it's about time. And then finally, when we got married, they just said, well, finally.
Took you long enough.
Took you long enough. Like, all the kids knew, everybody knew except us. When we got married, there was never any thought that we wouldn't get married at the church.
That's true.
Really, the last thing they want to do is mess around with a bunch of little old ladies who decide you're going to get married here. And we did. So it's just that they were quite happy with what we were doing.
It's a great celebration.
Yeah.
When we got married, the first 7 years were good. We went through all the things couples go through, the occasional disagreement, but we didn't even disagree the way people disagree. We would just look at each other like, we can't talk about this right now. And he would go and sit somewhere else, or he would go for a walk, or I would go for a walk, or we would just both skip it and go for a walk and then come back. And every day started new, regardless of whatever we talked about. Every day was a new start.
When did you first become aware that he was going to have some problems physically?
His liver shut down right before the holidays.
When?
About 3 or 4 years ago. So, of course, he spent the holidays in the hospital. He didn't like the way life was. He didn't like this life. This was not what he wanted. So he got sick. They kept him in hospital. And then they said to him, you need a PSW.
A caregiver?
Yep. Because the seizures had started just before all of that happened. And we didn't know what the seizures were. We didn't know why they were happening.
Anne talked about Michael's repeated seizures. They would come out of nowhere. And it was hitting Michael hard. Nothing in his life was making any sense anymore.
So we got a PSW. And they would come first thing in the morning to help him, make sure he had breakfast and whatnot. But it wasn't long after that the seizures picked up. And then the falls got worse, and a myriad of things started going on. And then there was a whole year where he was like suicidal. Like, you wouldn't believe suicidal. Every time I come through the door, something was going on. I remember one night, I after they took him, and I think it was the third time he'd broken his leg or broken his foot or something, because he kept breaking his foot, one of his feet, because the bones apparently were so brittle that anything was a terrible disaster.
Every time Anne left for work each morning, she'd catch herself worrying about what she might find when she got home. Michael was starting to fall, and he couldn't get up. She once came home to find him lying on the floor. It was terrifying. And then there was that day, just after Christmas, 2021.
Take me to the moment where he told you his plans.
He was standing beside me with his walker. Honey, we have to talk. Honey, I love you. You know I love you. I don't want to be here anymore. It hurts. It hurts too much. Everything's falling apart. I don't want to be here anymore. Can you help me end it? And I said to him, honey, I can't do that. I'm your soulmate. How would I live with myself after? How would I go on?
I've heard Anne talk about the request Michael made several times now. I've gone over every nuance of it. It's still jarring to me, every time. I wasn't sure why I was having such a strong reaction. Now I think I know.
My name is Nadia Cribb, and I'm going to talk about my husband, Jack.
I'm starting to realize that this question of when a life is no longer worth living has direct ties to my own family history.
The first time I really realized it and accepted it was on a trip going to Florida.
That's my mom, Nadia.
In the middle of the night, I got up to go to the bathroom, and I had put the chain and the extra lock on the door before going to bed, and I noticed the door, the chain was open, the door was closed but unlocked. So, of course, I was very disturbed, and I thought someone broke into our room. And
She's talking about a road trip she took with my dad, Jack.
I laid in bed thinking, how did they get in? Your dad was in bed sleeping. I waited until he woke up, and I said to him, I said, did you hear anything last night because the door was open? And he said to me, he said, well, I was all over the hotel. I was looking for a place to sleep, and I checked every door, but every door was locked except this one, so I came in here. We drove to Florida, but it was awful. And I started out, and I bought a bell, put it on the door, and asked him to help me move everything movable to put it behind the door. And then I started for Nova Scotia. And I tell you, it was very difficult. Putting the bells on the door every night, moving furniture, and so on. Prior to that, every time a conversation comes by about people getting old and having, they didn't call it Alzheimer's, they called it old age sickness. He used to say to me, because his father had that disease and his grandfather had it, and he used to say to me very strict orders that if I lose my memory, I want you to give me a bunch of pills. I don't care what they are, but I want you to help me not to go through this phase. I don't want to live. And I used to laugh at him, and I used to say, Jack, I'm not going to give you any pills because it's against the law and I'd go to jail.
I never really knew much about that conversation. I keep finding out more from my mom, and it's opening up this whole new idea. My dad actually wanted his life to end, should it ever get to that point. That's not the man I knew. As a kid, I'd sit at the top of the stairs in our home during adult dinner parties and watch how he commanded the room. He'd masterfully narrate jokes, held them spellbound, deliver the punchline, filled the place with laughter. He'd pull out his saxophone, play Duke Ellington, Count Basie tunes. They'd dance. He was the literal life of the party. But he was also a successful banker whose charm and savvy got him an office in a Manhattan skyscraper when I was a kid. On weekends, he'd teach me music and take me to ball games. He was kind. His words were carefully chosen. His opinion, when he gave it, mattered. I wanted to be him in every way. He was, to me, the model of a man who lived life to the fullest. Learning that he asked for help to die, it didn't fit with who he was to me. I see that differently today, and so does my mother. Today, that conversation she had with him might have a totally different outcome. Doctors in Canada now have the legal right to help people like Jack and Michael. And I've been spending time with Anne and Michael to figure out how this even works. If Anne won't assist Michael, who will? Michael calls his doctor for help. That's next time.
Sometimes doctors are criticized for playing God. I think in the case of MAID, playing God would be saying no to a person. Then you would be deciding when and if a person dies, whereas affirming a person's decision is understanding your true role.
When it comes right down to it, I'm still going to be sick. There's nothing the doctors can do. So all the money in the world really isn't going to help me because nothing will change.
And coming up this season?
Because I've been suicidal for the last 20 years, it's kind of like my mind's little holy grail.
I would say that it gives the medical system an out when you abandon people. One person's empowerment is another person's abandonment.
And at least this way, he went on his terms, and it was his choice to make. He needed to end his life. And I had to be the first one to respect him for that. And I had to be the one who walked with him through that whole process.
I just can't imagine ever being able to do what she just did. I'm just the reporter. I mean, she's lived it.
If one looks at the numbers of Canadians who have a diagnosis of mental illness, it's very high. Should that disqualify you from all your rights?
There hasn't been a slippery slope. We've had a cliff. We've had no slope. We've had a cliff. We're falling off it. We don't know how far we're going to fall. And we have gone in a trajectory that no other country on the planet has gone.
Who are we to say, well, you're not suffering enough? And I think it's unfair to say to somebody, chin up, you might get better in 10 years.
Mr. Speaker, the safeguards simply aren't working, and the heads of psychiatry at all of Canada's 17 medical schools have called for a delay to the Liberals' deeply flawed MAID legislation that will expand eligibility to those with mental disorders. So will the Prime Minister...
This story is wrapped up in legislation and medical ethics and politics. But at the end of the day, what's it about? It's about raw human experience and choices of people in desperation trying to figure out what is the right thing to do. This is what it's about. This is the rubber hitting the road.
I'm Rob Cribb, and this is The Ultimate Choice. This season of The Ultimate Choice is reported by me, Rob Cribb. Written by Suzanne Reber and myself, and produced by Suzanne Reber and Bruce Edwards, who also mixed and sound designed our show. Allison Leighton Brown composed our theme and original music. Field recordings by Damian Kearns, Ian Thompson, and Bruce Edwards. Jess Alvarenga is our associate producer. Additional reporting by Masi Kalidbari, Declan Keogh, and Max Loslow at the Investigative Journalism Bureau. The Ultimate Choice was created by our executive producer, Suzanne Reber. Our show is a production of TVO Today in partnership with Piz Gloria Productions, the Investigative Journalism Bureau, and the Toronto Star. Our team at TVO includes Shahriar Tajvidi, managing editor of podcasts and digital video, Lori Few, executive producer of digital, and John Ferry, vice president of programming and content. And special thanks to Anne-Marie Owens, editor of the Toronto Star. If you enjoyed listening to The Ultimate Choice and believe in this kind of deeply reported and immersive storytelling, we'd be grateful if you give us a 5-star review on Apple Podcasts. Thanks for listening.